Hello, everybody. Today I'm coming to you with a topic that might seem controversial or might, ruffle some feathers. And I'm pretty sure that no matter how many disclaimers I make or how much I try to make my point clear, I will get some shit for this anyway. But this is something that's been a long time coming, and I've been thinking back and forth over the years if I ever should talk about this or not. And so far, as you can tell, I decided not to until today. But basically, what I'm going to be talking to you today about is me answering a question of being a psychologist and a witch at the same time, which I am both of those things. How do I reconcile them both? How do I make them both work for me in my work, in my practice, in my personal life as well? So, as you can tell already, this is going to be a controversial subject. So I actually got a question from one of my lovely followers on Instagram. So I'm just going to read the question to you so that you kind of get the context, and then we are going to get to some disclaimers. So here's the question. Hey Joanna, I have a question for you. Sorry if I write in Italian. This has been auto-translated by Instagram, by the way. I hope IG gives you the translation. I have a question that has been on my mind for a long time. I know you work in psychology. If I'm not mistaken, you're a psychotherapist. There you go. How did you balance your psychology education with traditional Polish witchcraft? How can you combine the voices of the ancestors that speak to you during divination with explanations that are purely psychological? It would be interesting to hear your views on this. Thank you anyway. So this is the question. I said I would prefer to answer this in a video format because I feel like there's a lot to be said when it comes to this. And as I said, I've been kind of considering back and forth over the years whether I should be talking about this at all or not. So, but at the same time, now that I decided to actually talk about it, I don't want this to be like heavily scripted or with every word being, thought out a fucking 1,000 times in advance. I want this to be real. I want this to be honest and, just present this to you in a way that's authentic to me personally. So, before we get to the whole thing, just a disclaimer at the very beginning that by whatever I'm saying in this video, I am presenting from the perspective of myself as an individual, not as a psychologist in a professional manner. I'm talking to you as a person, not as a psychologist. Does that make sense? I would really love for this to be clear. We are not sitting in any kind of session, and I do not owe people on YouTube with whom I am not working professionally as a psychologist to be that towards you in this capacity. So I am speaking as an individual, not as a psychologist per se. Another thing, in whatever I say in this video, I want you to know that I am not trying to discredit psychology or psychotherapy or getting professional mental health aid. In fact, I want you to know that I actively work as a psychologist. Starting in September, I will be on a little hiatus for various reasons for a few months, but I have been a psychologist for a decade now and have been active in the field all this time. And personally, whenever I as a human being struggle with mental health, whenever we talk about these topics of psychology versus magic, psychology versus esotericism, it feels like people tend to approach this in a very black and white way. This is not the way for me, although I have to stress this as well. Whenever I personally struggle with mental health, I will go and get professional help. As an example, last year I was struggling, over a year ago now, I was struggling with depression, like a major depressive episode, and I was under, the aid of a psychiatrist. I was on medication and I was getting professional help to get it treated. So whatever I say in this video, I don't want you, anybody watching this, to get the impression that I am trying to sway anybody from getting professional help when you need it. In fact, whatever I think about psychology as a field has little to do with how efficient these methods are in aiding people when they are experiencing any kind of mental pain, okay? I want this to be very clear. So now a tiny bit about my background. I actually started with occultism when I was about 16 years old. So occultism was first in my life before psychology. When I was 19, I started university, which I graduated when I was 23 years old. And as I said, I've been practicing in the field for a decade now. So you can kind of gauge the years, I guess. And when it comes to my practice, as I said, I started with occultism. When I was studying psychology, I was still a practitioner, although this was mainly in the psychological paradigm. And I think this is very important to stress. The psychological paradigm or model is one of a few models of practicing witchcraft or the occult, which is kind of based on the notion that whatever you are practicing comes from within. It is coming from your psyche, and it is kind of either an internal or an external manifestation of the forces that are kind of working in your psyche for the purpose of individuation or integration. This is just a very too long didn't read version of what this can be. By the way, if you would like to learn more about the differences in models of magic and how this pertains to the psychological model versus the spirit model, which is what I practice right now, I have a very comprehensive article that I wrote some time ago at this point available on my Patreon. The full title of the article is Solipsism versus Animism and the 50 Shades of the Spirit Model in Witchcraft. I would also highly appreciate it if you chose to support me via Patreon, as I'm currently highly depending on this aid. This article in particular is available at the $3 tier, which I believe the article alone is worth that price, but you get access to all of my content across the board that's available on this tier for the duration of a month for the $3. So if you would choose to support me, it would mean a great deal to me. So anyway, I was practicing in the psychological paradigm for quite some time. Then when I was already, a practicing psychologist in my late 20s, I experienced a huge kind of spiritual shift in my practice towards the spirit model and specifically towards animism. And that led me to kind of discard the psychological aspects of my practice, discard the psychological model as a model under which I am perceiving what I'm practicing, in favor of traditional folkloric witchcraft and historical expressions of the craft, which is what I am practicing until today. And I believe, honestly, that when it comes to psychology versus animism or versus the spirit model of practicing magic, they are not 100% compatible with each other. I go into detail and the nitty-gritty of why and how and the kind of base philosophical ideas that underpin those models of magic in the article that I mentioned. So if you are not familiar with the models of magic or what kind of philosophical basis you can expect from each of those models, I highly recommend reading that article. But just to kind of recap some basic things so we are on the same page. When it comes to the psychological model, it is very much rooted in, materialism, spiritual materialism, solipsism a lot of the times. And when it comes to the spirit model, it is based in animism. And those two are very much not compatible because they focus on different things. They perceive the root of what you're practicing, the root of magic, to be coming from different places. And their end goals are different as well. When it comes to the psychological model, it is very much focused on the individual. You are very much kind of focused on achieving your personal goals, on developing as an individual, achieving individuation or achieving enlightenment, whatever you want to call that. There's many words for that. You perceive the root of magic to be coming from within. Versus when you look at the spirit model, it's very much the opposite, where your magic and what you're practicing is not necessarily about you. The end goal is not personal development. The end goal is existing within a community or ecology of persons, human and non-human alike. And the root of magic or the source of magic comes from the outside, comes from cultivating relations with spirits in the outside world, okay? So as you can see, those two are very, very different. To put it another way, the psychological model is very much trying to rationalize the natural spiritual experiences that us as human beings experience, and trying to make it explainable, or alternatively trying to pathologize it as mental illness. And here's where we get to the uncomfortable truth of psychology as a field, that it's very much rooted in colonial and patriarchal mindsets. As a field, as a whole, it is very much rooted in the Western civilization, in the Western culture, and unfortunately a lot of what we see in psychology as a field of study and as a field that offers some kind of outlook on life or philosophy, you could say. We are not talking here about the practical tools of psychology used to help somebody. We are talking about it as a field, as a whole. A lot of it, as I said, is rooted in those systems of oppression, and unfortunately a lot of it pathologizes very natural affinity of human beings for experiencing spirituality, broadly speaking here. And that also means that it pathologizes the indigenous ways, it pathologizes traditional or folkloric perceptions of the world, and perceives them as primitive, underdeveloped, or straight up, not healthy, or again, as a pathology, as an illness. Okay, and that stands in opposition to everything that traditional witchcraft, that folkloric witchcraft, that animism are rooted in, which is very much, this root of ancestral practices, traditional worldviews, folkloric worldviews, indigenous worldviews. All of that, all of those worldviews are very much rooted in animism, and thus in the spirit model, in acknowledging that the world is inhabited by persons, not all of whom are humans. In fact, we as a species are the minority when you look at a broader picture. So it's not entirely, as I said, compatible with each other. And now when you look at it this way, and again, if you want this explained in more detail and with more nuance, please read my article. I really don't want to be sitting here and giving you a lecture, because that would take, I think, at least 2 hours, to be honest, to, make sure I include all of the information that is important here to understand the nuance of it. When it comes to being a psychologist and being a traditional witch at the same time, I have to say that for me, in practice, I needed to have a talk with myself at some point when I switched from the psychological paradigm towards animism, about how I'm going to navigate this. Because when you are an animist, and I am an animist with my entire heart, this is not something that I'm just playing, pretending, for the camera or for social media or for my Patreon to, monetize off of this. No, this is my way of life. It's fundamental to my being. And thus, I needed to make a divide between the two. When it comes to my work, I can't speak in detail about what I do, how I do it, all of that here, because this is not the place for that, and that would be unethical. But I can assure you, and that's all I can say really, is that when I am at work, I am a psychologist. Therefore, I allow my mind to switch paradigms, so to speak, in order to do what I do fully ethically and in line with the guidelines that are agreed upon in the field. And I just don't mix in any of my worldview into this, because that would be unethical. But I think, personally, even though the field as a whole is very much biased, that it's also unethical to insert pieces of any other religion that you happen to be a part of into your work as a psychologist. So if you are a psychologist who is Christian, you also shouldn't be imposing certain things on the people you work with, right? I know that the field, especially in Poland, because this is a Catholic country, is very much biased, as I said, and it's accepted that if you are Christian, if you are Catholic, you can insert pieces of that into your work and nobody's going to bat an eye. But if there's expressions of any other kind of belief or spirituality, then the bias is skewed towards ridiculing that or making that something that is primitive or has no place in the modern worldview of a healthy human being, right? So, but just to, again, recap, when I am working as a psychologist, I am simply doing what I'm supposed to do according to the guidelines that I've been trained within, and I do not insert parts of my other side of life into that. So that's totally separate. Now, when it comes to my craft, on the other hand, when I was practicing within, the psychological model, basically, of course, I was inserting a lot of my training into my practice, and I have to say it's been immensely helpful, because obviously if you are trained in the field, then you have a lot to draw upon into that model of magic. But now that I am not practicing within that model anymore, it is not something that plays any important role in my practice anymore. Of course, it does help when I have to deal with people, for example, when I am doing a divination session for somebody, or otherwise holding space for other people, even if it is within the context of the craft. I can still use my training to be able to provide safe space for people, or to be able to recognize certain things, or be more aware of when somebody might need more psychological aid instead of magical, right? That kind of a thing. So in that sense, it is helpful. But when it comes to my worldview, there was part of this question of how am I basically rationalizing getting information in divination from ancestors or working with spirits, etc. The answer is I don't. And I don't think it needs to be explained, rationalized, or otherwise made to be acceptable by the Western society that is rooted in those values that I do not follow and don't believe in anymore. And I actively do not want to play a part in that, and I don't think it's appropriate to try and explain away my ancestors as some kind of psychological process that's happening in my mind. That is, again, pathologizing and ridiculing the very heart of what witchcraft is in the animist or spirit model of perceiving it, at least. And as I said at the very beginning, I don't think the two are compatible. But as a human being, being very nuanced, complex, and having to live my life in the way that I do, I need to, separate some things in order to make them work. Although I have to say as well that becoming an animist has changed my entire perception of psychology as a field. and not for the better. That's all I can say. I think that because of where psychology as a field is rooted, it has no way of understanding certain phenomena. I think it's very minimizing. I think it does not try to properly understand the totality of human experience, especially the more spiritual side of it. It discredits ways of being such as animism, because if you told somebody that you believe that the animals and plants, for example, around you are persons, they would say, wow, you are mentally ill, and that's it, that's the end of the story, right? Whereas this more traditional or indigenous way of perceiving the world, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I don't think it's pathology. I think it's experiencing the totality of what's out there to be experienced. And I have to say that since I became an animist, my life became existentially much more fulfilling and much more filled with meaning as well. And I think the society as a whole, sorry, I'm like throwing big terms like that here, like generalizing in this way. That's what we are missing a lot of the times in the Western civilization. This toxic individuality, this human centrism that's shoved into everybody's throat and forced upon everybody is making people miserable. Everybody is feeling alone, senseless, directionless in their lives. And when you feel like your life has no meaning and you have no place in this world, and you are very much alone with everything, that is very much what induces issues with mental health. And I'm not saying like I'm not trying to imply here that not being an animist is what induces mental illness. No, not at all. I'm just saying that the way our civilization developed and made us completely disconnected from our kind of base nature, the root of where we came from, made us largely miserable. And I just think living as an animist, I can just see the change that it made for me in my life on so many levels. I think that fields that are becoming more popular, such as eco-psychology, or including nature therapy, broadly speaking, into therapy, or including animals into therapy and such, basically reinserting ourselves into the natural world, broadly speaking, is becoming more popular because it works, and it's not trying to come up with very elaborate, made-up theories for why things work the way they work in our psyche. They just work. And I think that's where I am leaning towards more and more. And to be honest, I don't see a future for myself within the field of this kind of normative psychology. So I have been on a kind of crossroads for a long time now, where I am basically considering how to progress with this, and I am either going to ultimately leave the field, or I am going to train myself towards offering other types of therapy, like nature therapy or eco-psychology, and integrating those into a more holistic view of the human organism as a whole, not just the psyche kind of took away and inserted separately into a separate box to be treated away from everything else, uprooted from everything else, because I just don't see, I don't believe in that. I just don't believe in that. And I think all of us who are in this field could really benefit from decolonizing psychotherapy, decolonizing psychology as a field, and generally decolonizing anything that has to do with mental health, because I think that's the, again, patriarchal and very much colonizer system and culture that we live in is directly impacting our mental health negatively in the long run as a whole, as a civilization, collectively, so to speak. And I think, if anything, the Jungian field of psychology is probably the closest out there to those ideas. But when I was studying psychology at uni, this field, the Jungian psychology, was the most ridiculed and basically perceived as, not serious, made up shit that makes no sense. And that is the approach to anything and everything that has to do with traditional and indigenous ways of perceiving the world. It's pathologizing all of those things that are very natural to who we are as beings. So yeah, I just don't see how this can be reconciled in the long run. So anyway, I've been rambling for very long. If you have any questions, I hope I answered some of those here, but if not, just make sure to ask them below. Thank you so much for watching, and please do not fucking come at me. I will, of course, accept any genuine critique or genuine question, but I will not be allowing any hate or trolling. So just keep that in mind. Thank you so much for watching, and see you around. Bye.